What do you do if you don't like the provider seeing you in the hospital? What are the most important things you can do to promote healing and get home faster? Is it possible to have a positive experience when you're in the hospital for a prolonged amount of time? Dr. Monique Nugent joins me to answer these questions and more. Stick around. Welcome to the Senior Resource Network, your #1 source for retirement planning, caregiving tips, and living your best. Joining me today is hospitalist and physician leader, Dr. Monique Nugent. Dr. Nugent has dedicated her medical career to hospital-based care, taking on leadership roles and advocating for every patient along the way. Her mission is to ensure equitable, safe, and high-quality healthcare for all. In her new book, Prescription for Admission, Dr. Nugent simplifies hospitalizations, offering vital information for better treatment and a positive experience. Whether it's an ER visit, an unexpected stay, or a planned treatment, Prescription for Admission helps you navigate the hospital so you can stay calm, feel confident, and focus on healing after a health crisis. Monique, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being here.
Of course. It's a pleasure to meet you. And so I always kind of look forward to these experiences, getting to see kind of behind the curtain, if you will, when it comes to various professions. And as I understand it, your book gives readers just that, a real life perspective on an often not so fun undertaking and, hospital stays.
Yeah. I think the thing is, whether or not we want to think about it, most of us are going to spend some time in the hospital somewhere along the line. There are joyful events like having a baby. There are planned events like knee replacements. But there's also the bulk of hospitalizations, which, kind of fall in between having an acute or chronic illness, accidents, flares of things, not feeling well, looking for diagnoses. And the hospital tends to be a bit of a black box for people, which is understandable. It's a big outlier in someone's experience, right? So I really wanted to spend some time, put pen to paper, and help people be prepared for what can be a really scary time, but with some preparation, you can be a big driver of your care and kind of change that fear from being just straight fearful to being prepared and vocal for your own care.
Yeah. So at seniorresource.com, our mission is to educate and empower boomers and beyond. So that's adults over a certain age. So I'm going to kind of put you on the spot here and ask, how do you feel Prescription for Admission addresses the unique challenges that those over the age of, say, 50 might encounter during their hospital stay?
Right. So I'm an adult physician. I'm an internist.
Okay.
And so as a hospital-based physician, a hospitalist, I care for adults who need to come into the hospital, but are not sick enough for the ICU, but can't leave the hospital, the emergency department.
Okay.
I think the matter is the bulk of my patients fall within the age group you're talking about. And my parents are boomers, and navigating a hospitalization for themselves and their adult children, helping them navigate a hospitalization, I see right now as really the experience that I'm seeing in hospitals. Yes, we have very older patients in their 90s and above, but the majority of patients who come into hospitals, patients are coming in their 40s, 50s. So patients that receive, the majority of patients on my list are often in their 60s and 70s. So this is really the demographic that Prescription for Admission can really help empower.
Gotcha. So all of your real life situations and anecdotes that are coming from the hospital are basically with, our demographic, our boomers and beyond.
Yeah. So this book was really written for people who can advocate for themselves. Advocating for a loved one is a bit of a different undertaking.
Yes.
And so in your 60s and 70s, if you're starting to have some chronic issues or some acute changes that you're, getting used to, like I said, looking for a diagnosis. This book really is meant for that person who can write these things down, who are thinking about how they're going to plan the next step. What does going home look like? All the different things that are going to change, the different specialties they're going to need to talk to. And so this is really who I have in mind when I wrote the book.
Okay, so you mentioned there's a lot of talk of how to advocate for a loved one or advocate for yourself. So I guess on that subject, kind of, what do you do? What's your opinion on what you should do if you don't like the provider that's seeing you at the hospital?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. So hospitals are kind of different from clinics in that people will come and go throughout your hospitalization. You oftentimes may have 2, 3, 4 different physicians, depending on how long you're staying. And also depends on where you are in the hospital. So who you're seeing in the emergency department is not going to be who you see upstairs on the floors. If you need to be in the ICU, the person on the floors is not going to be the person you see in the ICU, right? And then also remember, you're going to have a lot of oftentimes specialists that come in and out. And so what I always say to people is, don't let a personality disagreement be the reason that you cut a hospitalization or an interaction short, right? There are a myriad of personality types that work in hospitals and who are providers. And there are going to be times where you just might not get along with the person. The thing that I always want to drive home is safety, though. Do you feel safe with this person and the care that they're delivering? If the answer is no, then that's a very big and different situation from I didn't like the way somebody spoke to me. Because those types of things, you can sit down and say, like, hey, I think we had a bad interaction before. How can we turn the clock back, right? How can we get on a place where we're respecting each other? And it's also with nurses, right, as well. But remember, nurses change shifts. You may have within 24 hours, 2 to 3 different nurses, right? And so like you may be there, but that person may leave. So maybe give it a couple hours and you might get a different friendly face. But if you feel like somebody is unsafe, then that's when you need to start advocating to have that provider changed. And in the book,
that is an excellent point.
Yeah. So in the book, I say, everybody has a boss. And so one way you can, or you should go about it is, number one, in real time. Not like, 3 days ago, I felt X, Y, and Z. If you feel unsafe in the moment, then address it in the moment with that provider. Say like, I really didn't like the way that this went down, or I don't feel that I'm being listened to. So always address things in real time, because you can clear up a lot of misunderstandings and set expectations for how things should go in the future. And then go up the chain of command. If you're talking about providers, what I would suggest is to reach out to a patient advocate. Hospitals all have patient advocacy. They may go by different names like patient experience or community outreach or things like that. But this office is meant to be your liaison with the patient and other parts of the hospital. And they often know how to navigate changing providers. They often know how to reach the higher ups within a provider's like ranks, like who's the director of such and such. They may know, what somebody's schedule may be. They, you sit down and say, like, I didn't like this person, I feel unsafe. And it's like, we looked at their schedule. It turns out today's their last day anyway. Like, okay, so I'm getting a new doctor tomorrow. So this can give you some information. And I always encourage people to really try, and I know it's hard because being in a hospital is very emotional, but really try to be clear and factual with what your concerns are. Right? Because that's how you can drive change and above all set expectations for what you think went wrong.
So do you have any, I guess, there's a lot of, there's basically 2 personalities, there's introverts and there's extroverts. So what's kind of your tip for, say, an introvert who, might be unhappy with their care or their loved one's care, but they're afraid to speak out? I mean, is there, if they're going to say they have a safety complaint and they go to the advocate at the hospital, whatever they're called in their place. Do they have confidentiality? How does that usually work for them?
So because you're addressing your issue, it's
Mhm.
unlikely that it's going to be confidential, right? You're going to the patient advocate and saying like, I feel unhappy for X, Y, and Z reason, and so they have to help you navigate. So it's unlikely that it's going to be confidential. But do you want it to be confidential? Likely not, right? You want
Right.
your to address. And you always, and I've gotten this question too, you always want to make sure that, if you think a little bit altruistically, you're addressing issues because the next patient who comes along, you don't want someone else having a safety issue or bad experience. Think of yourself as a bigger patient advocate when you're advocating for yourself.
Right.
Really, I would say lean on the resources. Talk to your nurse, talk to patient advocacy. If you have a primary care doctor who you're comfortable with, give them a call and see if they can reach out to the hospital. If you have a specialist who you see and have a close relationship with, a lot of patients do, right? A lot of people say, like, my cardiologist, my gastroenterologist, reach out to
Mhm.
that person and say, like, hey, I'm in the hospital, I'm having a hard time for X, Y, and Z. You formed a bond with that person. They're invested in you just as much as you're invested in them. And they oftentimes have ways of communicating with the hospital-based physicians what your concerns are. But also, they can also communicate with you and give you a different perspective to say,
Mhm.
like, well, actually what's happening is expected, or actually you're right, what's happening isn't expected. Let's get on top of this. Thank you for letting me know. So use your community. There are often people in your circle who may be more medically inclined than by you. Everyone has a cousin, sister, aunt who's a nurse. Give
Mhm.
that person a call,
That's true. That is so true.
right? Reach out to them. Make sure you're using whatever resources you have for the people who care about you. And those come in so many different forms. People will bring in spiritual advisors who can sometimes sit at the bedside and again act as that liaison for
Yes.
people you're saying who may not be as extroverted to say, hey, I have a problem. Someone who sits at the bedside and says, hey, doctor, Joe was really feeling a certain way yesterday. This is what you need, because being in a hospital can be very isolating. And so
Yes.
if you can bring in all of your community that loves and supports you, then you're going to bolster yourself for success.
Those are all excellent, excellent tips. Thank you for those. All right. So let's talk about going home from the hospital. Most people want to go straight home after they're hospitalized, but we know that that's not often always the case. A lot of times patients get discharged, but then it's off to rehab or it's off to a skilled nursing facility for a little bit of time. So if you end up in that boat, moving from hospital to rehab, what should you be focused on when you're in rehab or in that nursing facility?
So what I want you to focus on is the plan for how you can leave, right? What are you there for? If you're there for wound care, what is my plan for wound care? How many times a day is this going to get changed? When is the surgeon going to come reassess my wound, to see if I need to go back to the operating room? If you're there for rehab, it may be uncomfortable. You may not want to do it, but get up, participate. And if you feel like you're not getting moved enough, again, use your resources, advocate. Hey, I didn't get a chance to get up. I want to be more active. I think I can participate more, and touch base with the providers and the case managers there to make sure that you're on track for what you need to be discharged. And and you bring up a good point, the transition from the hospital to a facility or an acute, a SNF or an acute rehab,
Mm-hmm.
is different from the transition home, right?
Yes. Yes.
So the prescriptions that are written for you between the hospital and that facility are going to now be different from the prescriptions that are written when the facility discharges you, right? And this is where the book, again, I really want people to know what medications they're taking. Write down what you're taking before you got in the hospital. So when it's time to leave, you can reference back and say, like, oh, this is my list of new medicines. This is my list of old medicines. What am I doing now? Which ones am I continuing? Which ones am I not? Right? Because it is not, you're right, a straight line home a lot of the times.
Right.
And, for people who go for treatment, right? Let's say you're going for wound care and antibiotics. You're not going to be leaving with the same wound care and antibiotic regimen from the facility that you left from the hospital. Hopefully, right?
Right.
Hopefully the wound care has changed because it's been addressed or the antibiotics are over, right? So that medication list is going to look different from what you left with the hospital.
So on the subject of medication, so you say you should always have always have an updated list of medications to bring with you on your hospital stay. But what about when you get transitioned from the hospital to a rehab or a skilled nursing? I mean, does the hospital usually take your list that you've given them and give it to the rehab, or do you have to worry about providing that list more than once? How does that usually work for patients?
So what you touched on is a process known as medication reconciliation. And the medication reconciliation process is going to happen several times throughout your care. The first time it's going to happen is when you come admitted to the hospital. And supposedly the last time it's going to happen is when you're discharged, right? But what we're talking about is going to happen again after you get discharged from the facility. And what is a medication reconciliation process? It's where you take the list of medicines you were taking, and then the doctor says, you can take this during hospital, but not that. And we're going to add something else. So what is safe to continue taking, what is not safe to take, and what do you need now during your hospitalization? And then when you're discharged, they're going to go through the list that you're taking in the hospital, and they're going to say, well, they no longer need this, and that, because they're done with it, or those were medicines that we were keeping for comfort, someone's constipation or something like that. And then I want them to continue taking these other medicines they were taking at home. Oh, I've changed the dose of that one. So we'll update it, right? So they're reconciling the process. So when you're discharged and go between the hospital and a post-acute care facility, that happens again between those two facilities. Your original list of home medications will be in the record, but it may not look the same as what it looked like when you came in. And so I always tell people to be the owners of their information, be the owner of your information clearly and consistently. So bring that list with you again to the post-acute care facility, so that when you're discharging, you're going over your medication list, you are just as informed and participatory as ever. And so if you continue to keep that list with you, then you can say like, oh, okay, I understand and see why things have changed. Because also, it may be a long time since you've been home, right? If you spend 4 days in the hospital and a week or two at rehab, it may be a long time. And so, you just want to make sure you're remembering and you're participating to the best of your ability.
Okay. Excuse me. So I'm going to shift gears again. I'm looking at my, don't judge me. I'm looking at my notes. So we talked about how, prescription for admission, it's based a lot on your personal experiences, and that's, mostly with older adults. But I mean, can all of this book kind of apply to everyone, not just of, people of a certain age? How might you see your book contributing to the broader conversation about patient advocacy and healthcare empowerment?
So like I said, this book is written for the people who are able to really drive their own care. And that can be of any age. That being said, having been the mom of a baby in the NICU, right? Advocating for infants and children are very different in the role of parent than advocating for yourself as an adult in the hospital. And then also the experience in obstetrics is also very different from the acute medical needs, for patients who are having heart attacks and cancers. And so I wouldn't put this book into those two realms. In fact, I was once preparing to do an interview and someone said, okay, we're going to talk about children. And I was like, please don't. I'm not a pediatrician. And it's a very different world. And like I said, having been a NICU mom, the experience is extremely different and very fraught with fear and emotions. And you're just not thinking in the same way as you think of when you think of yourself.
Yeah. That's a very good distinction to make. Yeah.
And then obstetrics is also really different because though these are expected hospitalizations, the medicine behind it is just kind of very, very, very different from the medicine that I practice. And then also, bringing new life into the world and all of the joys and pains that go along with it are tied up with a lot of cultural, religious, personal beliefs that I did not address and purposefully in the book, because I think it's just a very different world as far as hospitals. So if you're an 18 or older and you come into the emergency room, they say, hey, you're too sick to leave, but you don't need the ICU. I say this book is for you. I plan on, working on some stuff for caretakers and people to help people really understand how to advocate for older adults, because adult children advocate for their parents is something that I come across all of the time.
Mm-hmm. I would be very interested in that book too.
Yeah, but it may be worded a little differently, but the lessons in this book are essentially the same. Know who is who, set expectations for communication, participate in communication, be the driver of your care, know how to escalate your concerns. My book spends a lot of time explaining what the roles of different people are in the hospital. So the reason behind that is so that you understand when they come knocking, what the importance of that interaction is going to be.
And that's a great thing to explain, because for example, I know we just said we're not going to talk about kids, but I had several C-sections in my life, and being in the hospital for 4+ nights, depending on which pregnancy it was, all I wanted to do was rest. But it seemed like every hour somebody new and different was coming into my room to do something or ask me something. And half the time I didn't know what the heck they were there for, or who they were, or why they were there. So I'm sure that probably applies anytime you're admitted into the hospital for something. You have all these different people coming in and checking on you, and you're like, who are you? Yeah. If they don't tell you. So
I have a story in the book about a patient, and something I see all the time. It's time for discharge, and her daughter, is there helping advocate for her and helping her mom navigate hospitalization. And at discharge, they say, that she's gonna have to go to rehab, and the daughter says, "Well, how did you guys come to that conclusion?" "Oh, we tried to walk her. She couldn't walk. We thought she should go to rehab." "Well, how often should she get up with physical therapy?" And it turned into kind of she was really digging and trying to figure out, I thought mom was well enough to go home, and now this is kind of different. And so it turns out that every time physical therapy came by, that patient would say "Oh, not right now. Can you come back?" And she wasn't being argumentative at all. Something was going on. She was watching her show. She was eating her lunch. And what she didn't understand was that, no, they were not going to come back. It was highly unlikely that they were going to come back. The physical therapist in the hospital runs a pretty tight schedule. And they're not going to be the same type of physical therapy you see in the office or in rehab that will put you on treadmills, right? They're going to really kind of get you up and mobile, assess how safe you are to move, help you make a couple of laps. She was kind of expecting a different experience and kind of expected that they would come back. And so, she didn't have the full understanding of oh, put your food down and participate now, because when you have their audience, it's time to really take up that resource.
Right.
It's something that we see over and over again is that, you're balancing, and it's really hard, when you were driving, you're balancing your discomfort, getting tests done, getting procedures done, wanting to rest, having to eat. You may be moving differently, using the bathroom differently. All of this is uncomfortable. And then 20 people knock on your door and say "Oh, okay, I'm the speech therapist. Oh, okay, I'm the case manager." And you're just I want to go to sleep.
Exactly.
But each of those interactions really has a lot to do with how you're going to continue to drive your hospitalization. A hospitalization is a very active process. I think gone are the days from the 70s and 80s where patients stayed in the hospital for a long time to kind of convalesce. Hospitalizations really move very quickly. And so you've got to participate. It's really just as much work on the patient as it is the providers to do all of those things. And so when you've got the audience of whoever it is, if it's a social worker, hey, tell them what you need, take the time, get it all out. just take the time and get as much as you can out of every interaction.
Right, right. All right. Lot of great information, Dr. Nugent. Thank you so much. I am going to end it right there because, looking at my notes again, not going to lie, you already answered my last question for you a couple times over. I was going to ask you how you kind of envision making a positive impact on patients' lives with your book, Prescription for Admission. But I mean, you've answered that over and over again throughout our time chatting just now. At least what I'm taking away from this is it's all about advocacy, whether you're advocating for a loved one or you're advocating for yourself. It's using your voice and speaking up is like the big thing to do. Am I right here or?
Totally. And participate. And like I said, it's just as much of an active process for the patient as it is everyone who's working there. And so I know it's hard, but take your notes, get up, participate, go to tests, ask questions, and at night, hopefully you're able to get some rest.
Right, right. All right. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us today, Dr. Nugent. It was a pleasure to get to know you and hear your tips for taking charge of your healthcare. Friends, make sure you grab a copy of Dr. Nugent's book. It is Prescription for Admission. I will be happy to share links in the episode description. Dr. Nugent, you can find it on Amazon. Is there anywhere else you want our audience to look for the book?
Anywhere where you buy books online.
Okay.
BarnesandNobles.com, for example, it's there too. And so, yeah, there's lots of really great information. There's QRS codes. It's meant to be used. There's places for you to fill out your thoughts on different things in your care, your medication list. So please pick up a copy. I really have put my heart and soul into making it something that you can use. I say all the time, I want it rolled up in bags. I want the pages, to be dog-eared because I want people to really get as much as they can out of it.
All right. And then Instagram, you're on Instagram, right? The Happiest Hospitalist.
Yes, I am on Instagram. I'm not the best at Instagram. So my Instagram page has no music and it doesn't have a lot of flashy things. I'm learning how to use Instagram, but please follow me at the Happiest Hospitalist.
All right. I'll add that link in the description also, and I will follow you.
Yes, thank you. And then also I've got a website, which is drmoniquenugent.com. I'm going to be putting up some blog posts and there's some other podcasts and stuff that I've done and some great downloads for people to use because, again, this is all about helping people be prepared.
All right, cool. And and I'll put links to all of that, your website, all that great stuff in the description. And again, it was just really nice chatting with you today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you and your audience.